class tonight, the next one in our series exploring historic Jewish heroines. And for the past couple of weeks, we've been mainly in the land of Canaan, which is modern day Israel. And tonight we're going to travel a little bit away from there to a new geographic location to meet our new personalities whom we will learn from. So you've probably heard the expression, or maybe the description. Sometimes somebody describes a person or a situation that they can't see the forest for the trees. It's an interesting type of expression. So a person finds himself in a forest. Some of us live in a forest or nearby a forest, but I'm sure we've all been in a forest at some point in our lives, hiking, walking, admiring the nature. And we can find ourselves very close to a tree. And if you've ever spent any amount of time looking at trees in different places, you've probably noticed that different trees have different details. Some are wider, some are narrower, some are taller, some have more dense leaves that come lower down their trunk. Some have their leaves mainly up at the top. All different types of trees. Even on the trunk itself, you may have ridges, it may be smooth, you may have ovals, different things, all sorts of details. So when we describe somebody who can't see the forest for the trees, it's referring to somebody who's very focused on the details of a situation and is having a hard time seeing the bigger picture. So just to get ourselves thinking a little bit, do you think that's a good thing, not a good thing? Is it preferable to have a view of the entire forest, or is it perhaps positive to be able to notice the details in each and every tree that you walk by? That's a general question to think about. And also just to think for yourselves about your own tendencies or personality. Do you think that you are somebody who usually sees the broader picture usually, or do you tend to usually focus on the details of what's happening? So those are just some things for us to think about as we get into our topic tonight, and a little bit later, you'll see why I brought up this discussion. Tonight we are traveling from the land of Egypt down to, from the land of Canaan down to the land of Egypt. And the Torah describes how Jacob and his family, his wives and his children, whom we spoke about, some of them last week, they were traveling down to Egypt. Now, what was the reason why they left the land of Canaan to go to Egypt? There was a famine in that area, and there was a severe lack of food due to a drought. And the family of Jacob was starving together with all the rest of the population. Now, what had happened was, a number of years earlier, one of the tribes, one of the sons, Joseph, you might be familiar with this story, he had been sold as a slave by his brothers. Unfortunately, that's a whole different saga to explore, not for tonight. Anyway, long story short, he had ended up in Egypt. He was now the viceroy, the second in importance to Pharaoh, and he had foreseen this famine, and he had taken steps to preserve a large store of grains and food over a number of years, and he was now in charge of the operation of selling it to neighboring countries, to people coming from neighboring countries. And Jacob's family had come to Egypt to buy some of this food, and in the process had discovered that Joseph was their brother, and Joseph invited them all to come down to Egypt. So the Torah describes how the family of Jacob is traveling to Egypt, and it says that there were 70 souls coming into the land of Egypt. Now, if we were to actually read all the names and count up all the names of the people, we will discover, in fact, that there were not 70 people, there were actually only 69. So why does the Torah say that there were 70? Because as the Jewish people, as the sons of the family of Jacob were crossing the border from the land of Israel to the land of Egypt, a new member of the family was born, a little baby girl whose name was Yocheved. And she was the 70th and youngest soul who had now been added and joined to this illustrious family. In Jewish thought, we believe that nothing is by chance, everything has meaning and significance, and even the place of somebody's birth or the circumstances of someone's, where someone is born, has significance for that person and for their life. And we will see how the fact that this young baby girl, Yocheved, was born on the way, straddling these two worlds from the land of Canaan into the land of Egypt. She was born at that transition point, gave her a special ability, a special perspective that she was able to use in a very powerful way to help and influence the people of her generation. It's interesting because in the family history, I've always been told about my grandmother that she was born in Poland as her family was running away from the Nazis. Now, I don't know exactly what that means, exactly how and when she was born, but that's the way it's always been told to us. And I've always felt like that, that specific scenario has really obviously had an impact on her life all the way through. So who was Yocheved? Yocheved was actually the mother of Moses. Okay, so Moses, the great leader of the Jewish people, who took the Jewish people out of Egypt and brought them through the desert. She was his mother. And we're going to fast forward a number of years to a time when the Jewish people are now in a very difficult situation. In the beginning, when they entered Egypt at first with Jacob and the 12 tribes, Pharaoh welcomed them in very warmly. He was excited that the family of his viceroy had come to live in Egypt. He was pleased to see that they were respected and upright, wonderful people. But we know that a number of years after that, the tribes had all passed away, and a new Pharaoh arose who had forgotten about Joseph and forgot about all the wonderful things that he did. And this Pharaoh was feeling very threatened because he had this family that was developing into a nation. The tribes, their children and grandchildren, they were giving birth, they were growing, they were developing, they were multiplying, and he felt threatened. He was afraid they're going to become so numerous, so powerful, so strong, they are going to overthrow him and take over Egypt. Which was actually, Egypt at the time was the superpower, very advanced in medicine and whatever sciences were going on at the time. They were the greatest and most powerful country, and he was very frightened. So he cooked up a plan to diminish this rapid growth of the Jewish people, which was to oppress them, to enslave them. He thought to himself, if I tire them out so much, if I wear them out, I keep them so occupied doing backbreaking labor, this will crush their spirit, this will exhaust them completely. They will not be able to continue having children, and they will stop growing as quickly and rapidly. But the opposite happened. And And the Jewish people, despite all the odds, just continued growing. So Pharaoh came up with a new scheme. He summoned the Jewish midwives. Now, who are these midwives? These midwives were two special women, one of whom was Yocheved, who we just mentioned, and her daughter Miriam. Miriam, she might be familiar to some of you or most of you. We've spoken about her in a previous class. She was Yocheved's daughter. And together, they were the chief nurses for all the Jewish women. Anytime anyone had to give birth, Miriam and Yocheved came to attend the birth. They actually have additional names given to them in the Torah, which describe this work of midwifery that they were involved in. Yocheved was called Shifra, and Miriam was called Puah. Shifra is from the verb lishaper, or mishaperet, which means to make beautiful, because she used to, after she helped the women give birth, she would clean the babies and swaddle them and wrap them, make them look beautiful. And Miriam, who was known as Puah, from the word po'ah, to coo, because the babies were crying or they were fussy and uncomfortable, and she had this soothing way, this soft voice. She would coo at them in order to relax them and calm them and make them happy. So together they were a team, this mother and daughter. Miriam was very young. She was only 5 years old, but she already was sharp and quick and devoted enough to help her mother. And they really were very involved in all the families among the Jewish people, helping them to give birth, helping them to raise their families. And they had a very special impact that way. So Pharaoh called upon these two midwives and he told them, I'm afraid of the Jewish people. There are far too many of them, and I don't like this. I don't like how they're filling up my country so fast, and I'd like to get rid of them. So this is what I'd like you to do. Now, Pharaoh's at the time they used astrology and stargazing to look into the stars and to see the future. And Pharaoh had astrologers who used to frequently have a look at the stars and see the constellations and understand and predict what's going to happen in the future. And they had told Pharaoh that there's going to be a boy born to the Jewish nation that's going to overthrow him. So this obviously really terrified Pharaoh, and he instructed these two midwives that whenever a Jewish boy is born, they should kill the baby. As the baby's being born, they should do something to end its life and just tell the mother that, unfortunately, tragically, the baby hasn't survived. Which, very sad to say, but unfortunately, we obviously know that in ancient times, survival of newborn babies was not the way it is today. They obviously did not have the same medical care in any way, shape, or form. They didn't have the scientific knowledge. They didn't have the same techniques. So everything was a lot more risky. So in theory, this could have been something that they could have gotten away with. Now Miriam was standing there next to her mother, and she was very concerned when she heard what Pharaoh said, and being very courageous, she started to protest and to say, absolutely not, how can we do such a thing? And Pharaoh became outraged and he wanted to punish her for this, but Yocheved pleaded with him and said, oh, she's just a child, she doesn't understand where she is and what she's saying, and Pharaoh was placated. But either way, he left them with this mandate. Now Miriam and Yocheved left Pharaoh's presence, and needless to say, at tremendous risk to their own lives, they stood up against Pharaoh's wishes and they did not do as he instructed. And it says in the Torah, the midwives, however, feared God, so they did not do as the king of Egypt had spoken to them, but they enabled the boys to live. So they just continued with tremendous courage and bravery and with no thought for their own well-being. they continued to deliver babies as usual. It didn't take long for Pharaoh to realize that his new scheme wasn't being successful. And he summoned them once again and he said, "What's going on?" And Yocheved said to Pharaoh, "The Jewish women, they're like animals in the wild who don't need assistance. By the time we come to help them with their babies, the child has already been born. And we're just there to assist with that, with what's happening afterwards." Now, Pharaoh didn't really buy this, but he realized that this avenue wasn't going to work. So he came up with a new decree, which was that every Jewish baby boy that was going to be born should be thrown into the Nile and drowned. Now, Yocheved and Miriam were actually very greatly rewarded by God for their self-sacrifice. It says that God built houses for them. Houses means dynasties. Two great dynasties came from each of these women. The priests that served in the temple came from Yocheved, and the kings of the house of David came from Miriam. So they were rewarded for their tremendous courage. So we have another terrible decree now hanging over the heads of the Jewish people. They know that every Jewish son that is now born is going to be discovered by Pharaoh's soldiers and taken and thrown into the Nile and killed. So they were very worried. They were very concerned. And the men got together to convene and decide, what should we do about this terrible situation? Pharaoh's truly oppressing us. Pharaoh has evil designs against us. We're in harsh slavery. We're suffering. The labor is absolutely crushing. What are we going to do? And Miriam's father, Yocheved's husband, his name was Amram, and he was looked up to as a leader among the Jewish people at the time. And he came to the conclusion that in such a situation, in such circumstances, how can we bring more children into the world? And he decided that the right course of action is that the husbands and wives should separate. They should divorce, because it's not justified to give birth to more children. Now, obviously, they weren't pleased to be doing such a thing, but they decided that they have no choice. Now, Miriam, this young girl, she overheard the meeting and she realized where things were going. And at this point, she was 6 years old. And without hesitating and without thinking about how much older and perhaps wiser these other people, these men were, and her father, she got up and she said, "Father, if you do this, then you're acting in a way that's worse than Pharaoh." And obviously her father was very shocked, but he stopped to listen to what she was saying. She said, "Pharaoh's decree means that there won't be any baby boys born, but your decision is going to preclude baby girls from being born. There'll be no more baby girls if we go through with your plan." So Amram heard her words and he realized that she was right. And he decided that, okay, the situation is very difficult. The baby boys will likely not survive, but we can't give in to discouragement and despair and into a dark view of things. The Jewish girls will survive, and who's to say perhaps there's a way the Jewish boys can survive. Yes, let's continue to have children. And he duly remarried his wife. The commentaries describe it very beautifully, the way the celebration took place between him and his wife. They had a public wedding so that all the Jewish people could witness it and follow the example, and also remarry their wives so they can continue to have children and bring up the next generation of Jewish people. This character trait that Miriam displayed and really was also something. Hi, Julia, welcome.
Hi.
The character trait that Miriam displayed was also something that she had received from her mother, from Yocheved. As I mentioned right at the beginning, Yocheved was born at that transition point between leaving the land of Canaan, the holy land of Israel, and entering into the land of Egypt. Because while being inside the situation of oppression, of difficulty, of pain, of suffering, death, all sorts of terrible things, and experiencing it on her own skin with her family, with her community, with the people around her, and feeling that pain within the situation, she still was able to remove herself and stand outside of the situation from that broader view, from that higher viewpoint, from a position of being in the land of Israel, and recognize that the terrible things that are happening right now, they're not the be all and end all. This is not the way that it's going to end. There's something better to hope for. There's a future ahead, and we cannot give in to despair. And this, her and her daughter Miriam were able to transmit this faith, this hope, this energy in face of all odds to the entire generation of women in the land of Egypt. After Amram and Yocheved remarried, Miriam, who is described as Neviah, she was a prophetess, she had a first prophecy, and she told her parents, my dear parents, you are going to be the ones who are going to give birth to that Jewish child that Pharaoh is so worried about, that Jewish boy who is going to be the leader of the Jewish people and redeem us all from this terrible situation. You are going to give birth to him. And this was at the young age of 6 that she had this prophecy from God. And indeed, it did not take very long. Shortly after that, her mother, Yocheved, did give birth to Moses, to the leader of the Jewish people. Being that she gave birth early, the baby boy was not taken immediately by Pharaoh's men, but after 3 months, she knew the time was coming. The soldiers would come and find her baby. So instead of waiting for them to come and leaving the baby at their mercy, she was proactive, and she built this kind of little floatable bassinet, if you like. It's described in the verses how she put it together with tar on one side and clay on the other side to make it float. And she took her son herself inside this little basket, and she placed him in the Nile River. Now, there are a few explanations why she did this. One of the explanations is that the stargazers who had told Pharaoh about this leader, they also told Pharaoh that this leader that's going to be born, he's going to meet his end by water. So Yocheved was hoping that if she takes her baby and places him in the water, then the stargazers will see in their astrology that this baby boy has been placed in the water, and they will think that he has been killed, and hopefully the decree of Pharaoh will end the decree, and then the future baby boys after that will be saved. And actually that is actually what happened. As soon as they saw that, the stargazers informed Pharaoh of this, and he brought an end to the decree. Moses did not meet his end in the water. He was saved by the daughter of Pharaoh, interestingly enough. And he was subsequently able to grow up and become the leader to redeem the Jewish people. Now let's fast forward a little bit to to the end of the story. So the Jewish people have been through the 10 plagues, they've been through the redemption, they've left the land of Egypt, and they arrive at the sea, and they're facing the terror of their oppressors once again, whom they thought that they had escaped, because the Egyptians, Pharaoh changed his mind and he sent his army to follow the Jewish people. And the Jewish people are standing with this big sea in front of them and the Egyptian army behind them, and they're despairing. And as we all know, God makes a very great miracle. Moses stretches out his staff, the sea splits, and the Jewish people cross over on dry land. Now they arrive on the other side, and they don't know about the fate of the Egyptian army behind them. But as they're standing safely on the banks of the river, they see that the sea has returned to its regular, the waves and a regular sea. And they start to notice how the sea is bringing up gold, silver, shields, swords, and they start to realize that the Egyptian army had followed them into the sea, and God had brought back the sea, returned it from being split, and the Egyptians had all been drowned, and now all of their spoils that they had brought with them was being washed ashore. And when they realized that their enemy had met its end and they were now really and truly free from the oppression of Egypt, their gratitude just overflowed and they began to sing. So the Torah describes how they sang the song called Az Yashir. And then it describes how the women sang. So it says as follows: Miriam, the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women came out after her with timbrels and with dances. Okay, a timbrel is a tambourine, tupim, as they say in Hebrew. So they had those tambourines and they were dancing. And we have Rashi, who is commenting on this verse, on this pasuk, and he says something very interesting. Now, just to explain to you, different commentaries on the Torah have different methodologies or different self-stated mandates. Some of the commentaries, their style is to look more at the esoteric part of the Torah. So when they explain part of the Torah, that's the element of Torah that they explain. Others are more midrashic. Others look at the simple interpretation. So Rashi is somebody who really just focuses on the very literal, simple meaning of the text. So when he's explaining something, he's usually answering a question that arises from a simple reading of the verse. So he looks at this verse and he sees that the women have these tambourines. So he realizes that there's an obvious question over here. Where did they get tambourines from? I mean, they're in the desert. They've just escaped for their lives. Why on earth would they have tambourines with them? So this is how he explains it. With timbrels and with dances, the righteous women of that generation were so certain that the Holy One would perform miracles for them, they took timbrels out of Egypt. So let's just picture this. Let's just enter their minds for a moment. They're in Egypt. Their husbands and children and family members are being whipped and beaten and killed left, right, and center. They're being forced to do the most painful and difficult work. Pharaoh switched around the jobs. The men had to do the women's work. The women had to do the men's work. He made them do things that were pointless just to cause them extra suffering. This suffering stretched on for 210 years, this slavery. So they were born into it. These people who were leaving Egypt, they had been born into it. All they ever knew was slavery. All their parents knew and could tell them about was slavery. What do you think, what state of mind do you think they would have been in? I mean, we could not have faulted them for despairing, for losing hope, for thinking that there's no brighter future ahead. But we see we see the exact opposite. We see that these women, inspired by Yocheved, who, as I mentioned earlier, was able to stand outside of the picture and see a bigger view and a future ahead. And also this was done by Miriam, her daughter as well, that we have a promise. God said that we're going to leave Egypt. There is hope. There is a better future, even though right now all we can see are the trees. All we can see is this big, wide, dark trunk with jagged edges and pointy branches that seems like it's impenetrable. There's no way to get past it. But the Jewish women were able to rise above and think about the future and have hope for it, to the point that it became so tangible. They actually did something very practical, and they physically prepared tambourines. They physically prepared a way so that they should be able to show a real, true outpouring of joy and gratitude and celebration when that miraculous day would finally come. As we saw it earlier with the men, with Amram, Miriam's father, whom they were taking that despairing approach. This world is dark and difficult. There's slavery, there's pain. We don't want to bring more life into a world like this. And it was Miriam, that young, very young girl, who was able to inspire that hope with them, that there is something ahead to hope for, and that there is a reason that we should continue to bring life into the world and focus on creating a new generation. And all the women of the generation did that. The men, they were working all day, back-breaking labor, tired to the bone, not enough food, hungry, broken. They would come back at the end, they would finish their day. They were not interested in thinking about spending time with their wives, possibly having more children. The women similarly had difficult and back-breaking days. But what did the women do? At the end of a hard, difficult, torturous day, they took the time to clean themselves off. They took the time to prepare themselves, to get dressed in whatever way they could, given whatever they had. And they had these pieces of copper, which they used as mirrors, to look at themselves, to beautify themselves. They used to prepare food and go out into the fields and meet their husbands. And their husbands were completely broken, as I just said, but they would feed them, they would give them something to drink, they would refresh them. And then using those mirrors, they used to arouse their husbands, reignite the interest. And in that way, the husbands were drawn and attracted to their wives, and they went on to be intimate, conceive children, and then give the women after that gave birth. Now, this is obviously something very tremendous and unbelievable, especially for the women. I mean, the women would have to be the ones carrying these children for the 9 months. The women raising the children, they didn't know if these children would survive. But they held on to that faith. They held on to that hope, that promise of a future. And they knew that they can't give up, they cannot despair, they cannot give in. And these children who were born, they were the ones who left Egypt. These children were the ones, it says that when they came to the sea and the sea was split, these children were able to see God. They were able to point to God as something tangible, as if we are looking at something, an object right in front of us, and we can see it, we can touch it, we can experience it. They were able to experience God in that kind of way. And this was the influence of Yocheved and Miriam on the entire generation, which obviously affected the Jewish people for all time into the future and ensured their survival. Very interestingly, a number of years later, after the giving of the Torah, so God instructed the Jewish people to build a Mishkan. The Mishkan was the precursor to the temple. It was a temporary sort of temple, shall we say, a structure where in the desert, where the Jewish people did the service for God. And Moses asked the people to donate gold, silver, whatever, copper, whatever materials they had in order to build this structure according to God's specifications. And among the things that the women contributed were these pieces of copper, these mirrors that they had used in order to attract their husbands. And Moses was a man of God. He spoke to God face to face. He received the Torah from God to transmit to the Jewish people. He was extremely spiritually sensitive and holy. And when he saw these mirrors, he thought to himself, no, this just doesn't seem appropriate. These mirrors were used to arouse the husbands, and we're going to take it and we're going to use it to create something that's going to be used in the temple for God, in the Mishkan. That just doesn't feel right. But God intervened. He said, no, Moses, you are mistaken. These mirrors are extremely precious to me. They are more precious, these copper pieces, they're more precious to me than anything else. It's precisely these mirrors that I want to be part of my Mishkan, of the place that I'm going to rest, of my home in this world. Because these mirrors, they represent self-sacrifice, they represent a hope and a vision for the future. It's with these mirrors that the Jewish women enabled the Jewish people to continue and to survive. And the item in the Mishkan that was built, that was made from these mirrors is the kior, which is the wash basin. It was made entirely out of copper. And it had faucets around it. It was what the priests, the Kohanim, they used to wash their hands and feet before beginning the temple service, before they were able to do any part of the service, lighting the menorah, bringing the sacrifices, whatever it was. First, they had to purify themselves and prepare themselves. And they used this wash basin in order to do that. Today, we also wash our hands to remind us of this practice. When we wash our hands before eating bread, that's one of the times we wash our hands as a symbol reminding us of that part of the service that the Kohanim had to use. So we see how precious and how valuable this behavior of the Jewish woman was to God, and the way that he reacted to it and the way that he felt about it. So going back to the forest and the trees, day-to-day life, or week by week, we can be in a situation where we only see the details of what's happening right in front of us, and it's hard for us to see the big picture. And those details can seem harsh, they can seem difficult, challenging, we wish they could be different. And we're very caught up in all those different details. And it can be easy to forget that really, this is just one tree. And there's actually a whole forest out there. There's a broader view, there's a much bigger picture that we're not really able to see yet. And sometimes we can stop ourselves and think about that and step back and try and remind ourselves of that. Sometimes that's too difficult and we need the encouragement of somebody else, perhaps somebody who's been through a similar situation and already come out the other side. Perhaps somebody who's a bit older, somebody who we look at as wiser, that can help us to get that wider or higher perspective so that we can continue with hope and with energy to push through a situation. And sometimes we can be that thing for that person for somebody else who feels very stuck and very overwhelmed by what's going on in their lives at that moment. And they're very much stuck in that particular part of the forest. It seems dark. The sun is not penetrating through the canopy of leaves above. And it's very hard for them to be able to take that step back and look up a little bit and see those rays, which slowly but surely at some point they do come through between those leaves. There's a story related by a rabbi. His name is Rabbi Brisky, and he is a Chabad emissary in California in the Conneaut Valley area. And he describes how many years ago he was, at one point in the year, he had extra activities going on at that particular time. He needed some extra help. So he recruited one of his nephews together with a group of his friends to come for a period of time to help him out with some of the programming and activities that were taking place in his Chabad center. And they were staying in a particular house. It was Shabbat afternoon after the prayers, and Rabbi Brisky's nephew and his friends, they were walking back from the synagogue to this home where they were staying. And as they're walking up the front walk to the house, they noticed that in the home right next door, there is a moving truck. And to their great surprise, it's plastered across the truck. It says, "Nice Jewish boy moving company." So what does a group of Chabad students do when they see something like that? They approach the moving workers, and they say, "Hey, I suppose you're Jewish." And it turns out that they're a group of Israeli movers, and they have a job. They're moving somebody's. They're helping somebody move into a new house. So, not willing to miss the opportunity, the boys they do their best to convince them and draw them in. They say, "You know what? You've been working really hard. Why don't you come in? We'll do some kiddush. We have cholent. We have kugel. We have challah. We have great food. Come, let's have a drink. You can come for a break." And they can't resist the temptation. And the group of movers joins these Hasidic boys, and they go into the house and sit down for a nice meal. And of course, it's very enjoyable. They're talking, they're eating, there's some singing going on. All of a sudden, one of the movers looks out the window and he says, "Oh no!" He saw that the homeowner has arrived in his car, is pulling into the driveway. He says, "Oh no, what's going to be now? He's going to come, he's going to see we're eating on the job, we're not taking it seriously." So one of the Chabad boys says, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." And he goes out of the house and he meets the new homeowner. And he says to him, "Do you happen to be Jewish?" And the man says, "I actually do happen to be Jewish, and I'm a leader of a choir in a Reform temple not too far from here." So the boy says, "Oh, wow, that's fantastic." The man was there with he had a daughter, and this Chabad young rabbi invites him in. He says, "Sure," they come in, and the celebrations continue. For the rest of the afternoon, they're eating, they're singing, they're talking. It's a beautiful atmosphere all the way till the end of Shabbat. They do the end of Shabbat ceremony, the Havdalah, and everybody leaves. Sorry, I forgot to mention, at one point in the afternoon, Rabbi Brisky, who is the director of the center, he walked over to the house where his nephew and these boys were to spend some time with them, to schmooze. He meets the movers, he meets this new neighbor, and he gets to talking. Anyway, the next day he receives an email from this man who's just moved into the community to thank him and to say how wonderful it was. And he ends the email by saying, "God works through you, Rabbi." And he writes his phone number underneath. So Rabbi Brisky's very intrigued by that statement. So he gives the man a call. He says, it was wonderful. I'm so glad we got to meet you. And he asked him what he meant. So the man said, well, you know, I was making a move into a new neighborhood. And just before I moved, I said a prayer to God. I'm moving to a new place and with my daughter. And I really would like that it should be a good thing for me in my life. I should be able to meet community and friends. And I was not, and I said, God, please give me a sign. Please give me a sign that I should know that this is the right thing for me in my life right now. And lo and behold, God was very fast. I haven't even moved in. I drive in for the first time when my possessions are being brought in, and lo and behold, I meet this whole, community and a rabbi and, Shabbat, and it's just amazing. Anyway, needless to say, from that point on, a connection developed and blossomed. This man started to attend classes and programs, and he really became very involved in the community. One evening, Rabbi Brisky was giving a class, and it was quite a heavy topic. It was about suffering and why God causes bad things to happen. It was quite heavy. And this man was one of the attendees. He was there at the class. And after the class ends, the man gets up and he comes over to Rabbi Brisky and he kind of falls on the rabbi and he's sobbing and he's crying and there's a lot of pain coming out. So Rabbi Brisky gives him a few moments and then he says to him, do you want to come to my office? We can talk. You want to come inside? So the man says, yeah, sure. They come into Rabbi Brisky's office. It takes him a bit of time to calm down. And he says, Rabbi, there's another part of my story that I haven't yet shared with you. This man, a number of years back, he had a terrible car accident in his family, and very tragically, 2 of his children were killed. So this one daughter that he had was his only surviving child. And from that point on, his life just turned dark, and it was just terrible. He could not deal with the pain. He didn't know how to behave. He didn't know what to do with himself. He fell into a depression, and things were just getting worse and worse. His marriage suffered, and it unfortunately did not withstand this terrible tragedy, and he ended up divorcing his wife. He tried therapy, he tried different things, and he just was not able to climb out of it. And he reached a point of such despair that he decided that life is not worth living. Life is just not worth it anymore, and it's too painful, and he just wants to finish it. But he decided that before he takes his life, he's going to take his daughter out. He'll spend a nice evening with her. He'll take her to the movies. And after that, he'll bring her home to his ex-wife. And then he'll finish his life on this world. So he picks up his daughter and he drives off to a certain mall. He gets out. They're going to the movies. He said he comes into this particular mall, and as he's walking towards the movie theater, he sees there's action, there's music, there are people dancing, and before he knows it, he's been pulled into a circle. And he's dancing with his daughter around in a circle. What was it? It was Hanukkah. And there was a menorah there. It was a Chabad group had come to the mall and had a menorah lighting, and they brought some music and some clowns, and they were celebrating, they were dancing. And he walked in and they pulled him right in. And he said, as he's dancing around with his daughter and he's just contemplating what he's planning to do later on that night, as he goes round in the circle and he's hearing the music and he looks at the menorah, he sees the lights, he realizes to himself, there is light, there is hope, there is something to look forward to. And by the time he's done with that little celebration, he's resolved to himself that, no, I'm not going to go through with this. I'm going to change my life. I'm going to pick myself up and I'm going to build a better future. And it was shortly after that, he says, that I moved from where I was and I moved into this new house. That was when I moved into this new house where you met me that Shabbat, when our connection started and the community, and I started to join your community. Rabbi Brisky is sitting there and he's listening to this man telling his story, and he's having a very hard time controlling his own emotions. He says to the man, "Please excuse me for a moment." And he stands up and he walks over to one of the bookcases and he pulls out an album. And as he's pulling out an album, he's leafing through, and finally he comes to the page. There's a picture there with a menorah outside a movie theater in a mall with a circle of people dancing. And the rabbi there is Rabbi Brisky in that circle. And next to him in the circle is this man with his daughter dancing. So obviously this is really something that neither party was expecting. And Rabbi Brisky goes on to describe how that celebration came to be in that mall. That mall was in a place called Simi Valley. It was called Mountain Gate Plaza Mall. He says at that time, his Chabad Center had made a resolution that every year when they prepare their Hanukkah programming, they're going to choose a new location to celebrate Hanukkah. Somewhere that hasn't had a menorah lighting before, we're going to go there and we're going to make a menorah lighting. So that year they need a new location. So they looked around on the map and they decided, okay, Simi Valley, great place, let's go there. This place was about 20 minutes away from Conyo Valley. At that time, there was no Chabad presence there. Now there is. So they don't know the area. So he calls up the general directory. Can you please give me the number of the mall in Simi Valley? So the operator says, the mall in Simi Valley, which mall? He says, the mall in Simi Valley, the mall. She says, which mall? He says, I don't know what's there. The mall. She says, Mountain Gate Plaza Mall. He says, yeah, that's the one. So she gives him the number. He calls up the mall. Hi, we're from Chabad. We want to make a celebration. We want to have a menorah. So the woman on the other end says, are you sure you want to make a celebration here at Mountain Gate Plaza? He said, yeah, of course. We want to bring Hanukkah. We want to bring the joy. Again, she asks, are you sure? And he insists that, yeah, absolutely. Anyway, before the conversation is over, the graphic designer is already making a flyer. They order, a clown and the balloons and the music. The designated night comes and they arrive at the mall. And all of a sudden they realize what the hesitation was from the woman on the other end of the phone, because this particular mall, Mountain Gate Plaza, was completely dead. There was not a single open store. They were all closed. It was on the verge of closing down. The only thing that was there was a movie theater. So he thought to himself, oh my goodness, this is really a waste of all that effort. I mean, there's really nothing happening over here. But they were there already. So he decided, you know what, why are we here in the middle of the mall? All the stores are closed. Let's move. We'll go in front of the movie theater. Over there, at least there'll be some people. We'll meet somebody, And they went there, they were in front of the movie theater and they're dancing and singing and doing the menorah lighting. He says he came home that night. This was by far not the most successful program he had ever created. And he thought to himself, it probably wasn't really worth all that effort. And as he found out later, he couldn't have been more wrong, because nobody could have imagined that that night in that particular mall in Simi Valley, that abandoned mall that was on the verge of closing down with maybe a dozen people there, somebody's life and a life as a whole world hung in the balance. And because of the experience that he created for that particular person, this man, he continued his life, he turned himself around and went on to build and grow and become more connected and to flourish and to heal. This story, I think, is a very powerful illustration for how we can be for other people a ray of light. We can bring hope where there seems to be none. We can show that there is a light, there is good, there is something positive shining in the distance. There is a broader view to take, even when the details of a particular individual situation seem to be excruciating, seem to be much too much to handle. We can do this for somebody by taking interest in them, by listening to them when they're in a challenging situation, and by injecting hope. And this is something that is feeling particularly poignant to me at this moment tonight, because my husband actually today officiated at a funeral. He led a funeral ceremony for an individual who unfortunately and very, very tragically did succeed in ending his life much too early, to the pain and devastation of his family and his community and his friends. So if we are able to be a lifeline for somebody else, and it doesn't have to take so much. What did Rabbi Brisky do? He danced in a circle with a stranger. He didn't know the man's situation. He didn't sit and talk to him for hours that night. I don't even know if they exchanged a word. Maybe they just stood in the same circle and danced around, and then the man left. It doesn't have to take very much from us to be like Yocheved, to be like Miriam, to say that no matter how dark and oppressive a situation looks and how pointless things seem, and that where are we going to find the energy to climb over this obstacle in front of me? We have that special power. We women have that ability to inject hope, to bring warmth, to revive the soul in that kind of way. And we can do that in the largest of ways, and we can do that in the smallest of ways to make a huge difference in the life of an individual. And that is something very special that we learn from these two women, these midwives, these mothers and sisters and leaders of the Jewish people in the time of Egypt and at the time of the redemption then. That concludes our class for this evening. Are there any questions?